Hi everyone, welcome to the Daily Chess. Today we are going to look at particular positions and understand a little bit of geometry and how king moves. Obviously, everyone knows how king moves one square, but how geometry is involved in overall board. So first things, we know the shortest distance between 2 points would be a straight line in real life, but that in no way is necessary in chess, right? Of course, that is true, but uh, considering if you have only kings, since we are studying endgames, the shortest distance, let's say, between this point and this point, king can maneuver like this in a zigzag pattern and still reach his destination. Uh, Even if you wanted to go in a straight line, it would be same. So the number of moves it takes would be same. This is a slight difference between the board's geometry and real geometry, right? So we need to understand how this works. Of course, internally, any decent player, maybe around 13, 1400 plus, already understand this concept that, yeah, I can move my king in a zigzag pattern and reach a particular position, which would be good. But where exactly this maneuver helps us, that we should internalize or understand and memorize. And that is what we are going to look at today. So this is the first position. So it's white to move, and it's a draw, not a winning position for white. So let's start understanding what's happening. Firstly, white pawn is open to go. Of course, black king is in can enter the square. If we move the pawn, then yeah, he won't be able to enter this particular square, and that should mean white pawn is winning. But that's not the only thing we should be understanding or paying attention to. Usually in a time scramble, when there's like 1 minute left and such position might arrive, white players will start pushing the pawn, which is not correct in this position. As of course the VAR shows, this is not winnable. It's just a draw. So why that happens? That also would be quite obvious. This pawn is advanced and he will reach the queening square. If we push the pawn, only 3 moves are required for the pawn to queen, and even in that, there on the f3 square there will be a check. Okay, so king will move and pawn will advance. This sometimes is also missed. Of course, let's say right now four moves are required, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and we can say that, yeah, I'll simultaneously queen, but two things: first, there will be a check, and second, once queens, this king is very vulnerable. Queen can just move up and block the queening square. So quite obvious move. Any rated player or any half decent player will realize this. But in a time scramble, we might push our pawn and lose the game. So what's the solution here? How white is able to draw this position? Of course, white will try to approach and take the pawn. Black can follow, and this is all there is to it. If we try to push the pawn, same check, and this opposition will always be there, and again only 3 pawn pushes to get the queen in. So moving the pawn on a4 is never an option. Only thing white can do is shuffle. So in case this happens, then king can come to f1. This is also going to be same, because now our pawn can go up. White has tempo. White doesn't need to lose a position. Let's say now this completely backfires, because once we push this, this will be the square and black cannot enter. This is the only move. We'll have to reach above. This is something that maybe folks can trap it, but this is a very particular situation that will never happen. and after this is the only move that works for black. So of course, any half decent player is never going to let white king get to the f1, and when this happens, this is the only thing that can happen. So like a pendulum, they'll go around and round, and this will be a draw. Uh, so in this particular scenario, the one thing that we should look at is, yeah, there will be a check, less squares to queen, so black will definitely win. That's the only thing. Uh, what let's see what happens if this pawn was slightly up. Still a draw. Only two squares. Okay, yeah. So twice the number of squares required here. I think. What happens? Let's see what happens in this one. Uh, we have kept white over here. So a6, f3 check. And this is a draw just because we simultaneously queen, but king is not in check. That's the saving grace basically. Alright, basic idea is clear. We need to make sure in such scenarios we need to calculate how quickly will the opponent's pawn will queen, and do we have enough time to push the pawn up. Maybe we can come up with simpler ideas on how to calculate, but yeah, we know this the law of squares, so that helps by a lot. Let's move on to the next position. Okay, so this is today's second position, and the concept we are going to look at in this particular one is called shouldering. Of course, when the name suggests shouldering, we shoulder someone when we want to push them out or just shove them out, right? Similar thing we are going to understand here. Okay, so from a perspective of 13 1400 rated player, no offense to them, I'm myself in the same range, I think. uh, my first natural instinct would have been march the king. Okay, seems simple enough, right? There's a pawn to be captured. My pawn is going to queen in two moves. That should be correct. That's the most natural thing. Again, this will happen in a time scramble of 1 or 2 minutes. It's not going to happen with 30 minutes on the clock, right? So the most natural or simplest way is wrong, obviously. Why? In last to last video, I think we have seen kings can hide on h1, on a1, on in situation scenarios of simultaneous queening that gives you a stalemate. Also, we looked at a position where king managed to capture the pawn on h6, but was trapped on the last line because the pawn was on h6. So we have to recall this particular scenario. If the pawn is on a flank row, flank column, then there's a high possibility that your king can get stuck behind this pawn. It's both. It's a double-edged sword. It can be used to get a stalemate, or it can be used to get a stalemate. Both players, white or black, or both sides on the boards can utilize this either to hide there and never let the king in. So imagine white black king here and white king outside, and white pawn is never going to queen. Or if the white king is here and black king is on c7, then white king is stuck, and again it's a stalemate. So it's a double-edged sword. Both players can use it. In this particular scenario, obviously we need to make sure that when king captures this pawn, white king is not able to confine him in and get control or opposition at these three squares. So the most important square that we need to keep black king out of is going to be c7 square. You reverse the position and it might be anything out of these four square. Alright, so that is the first thing, first concept, or most important one for this scenario. we need to keep the king out of c7. So when we calculate, we need to push him up. So how many ways can the king reach here? Of course, the straight one. Second is this one maybe. Yeah, two pathways king can take, and we need to make sure that he is not able to reach here when we capture the pawn. So basically, to reach to c7 when the king captures, black king needs to be in any of these squares, right? So let's it's easier if we look at it, right? So let's say I'm here. The positions where black king can reach to c7 from is going to be these three, right? And if I capture, I'll go into c7 and it's a draw. So what can we do? We need to push this king out of either d6 or d7. We need to keep opponent's king out of these two squares. Okay, that is sorted out. So we need to keep these three squares occupied when we reach d7. Alright, so how many ways can we approach this? So obviously, first way we'll calculate is this. If black approaches this way, we can get the opposition. If he goes away, then we have one tempo, and obviously king is out of these two squares, so we can capture. That makes one outcome. Or is there anything else? Okay, no, sorry. We get the opposition this way. If he tries again, we can get the opposition, and if he tries to come up, then again he's not able to reach d6 and c7. Okay, so we have the concept sorted out. Basically, in such scenarios, we can quickly calculate that, yeah, to reach c7, opponent's king need to be in one of these two squares. Okay, and to keep him out of it, we can approach the opponent's king, get the opposition. Once you have made sure that he is not going to reach here, this particular square, so I will say this one. Yeah, that makes sense. If we cannot reach these particular squares in next two moves, then we are good. Yeah, I think that covers the concepts of shouldering. Now, this is not just one scenario. This should be useful in multiple places, but primary use cases, you push your opponent's king uh, and keep him from getting into particular squares, specifically these four. In two moves, I'll say, yeah, two moves is the key. Of course, if you shuffle kings around, some positions might be possible, some might not. If we keep king here and king here, then of course black will somehow manage to reach or even win this one because white king is too far out, I think. But in that scenario, then we can, instead of white trying to approach here directly, white king can try to approach this way and try to get in. So we need to just not need to understand this, but implement it in different ways, right? So in such scenarios, while approaching from here, from the black side, we'll have to understand that, okay, once I capture the pawn, I need to keep the king out and go this way to shoulder the white king from approaching from this side. Okay, too many hypotheticals, I think, enough for this particular scenario. But yeah, concept of shouldering. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so here we are going to look at the concept of breakthrough. What exactly this one involves: you push a pawn, sacrifice it so that you'll get a passed pawn. You'll be able to create a passed pawn by sacrificing one pawn. Easy enough to understand. I think majority of players would be familiar with this position or this tactic that you push the pawn. If it's white to move, white will push b6, and whichever pawn captures, diagonally opposite pawn will push ahead. Okay, let's just see that first. So white to move, this is winning because whichever pawn captures, you push the diagonally opposite pawn, of course. and this captures, then I'll queen. Yeah. And if this captures, then obviously I'll capture and I'll queen. Straight enough to understand. Let's see what happens if it's black to move. Black to move, the easiest way to stop b6 is push b6, right? That's all there is to it. So if you capture, then we won't be capturing diagonally. Opposite, of course, we'll capture this. So capture captures is straightforward. We can easily calculate that. Same goes for this one. Capture captures, and if you push, then obviously it's game over. Okay, in this particular scenario is game over because your king is young, but I doubt that will be scenario in actual games. Queens would be much closer. Okay, so breakthrough, concept of breakthrough, we push the pawn and create a pass pawn. And of course, if you want to stop breakthrough, you push it ahead. Now let's see what happens when there are a couple of pawns involved. A couple of more pawns are there. So let's add one pawn for white. What happens now? Now b6 do not work. Now it's winning for white. Obviously, extra pawn should correlate. So let's see how. Now b6 will not work because cb we need to capture in the same row, like with the pawn on same row. Otherwise, this fails. I'll push. Now this fails because you can white can go c5. Uh, if you capture, I'll push and I'll win. Basically, what happens here is my pawns are closer to winning, and it's a 2 versus 1. That's why once I push, obviously, uh, I'll be able to queen quicker and I'll win. Um, this is quite obvious also. So this calculation is again quite straightforward. This will not win. What happens if we go c6? We go a6. Now if you capture, I'll capture and I'll queen. If you capture, I'll capture and I'll queen. Or I can even push. If you capture, I'll still win. Okay, so same goes for a6 and b6. So this is a good idea. I did not know this beforehand before studying this particular scenario. If you go this, then this is how I can create a passed pawn in a 2v2 or 3v2. So that's cool to know as well. Now, oh, is there anything else? Yeah, okay. There's one more position I studied on this.
All right. So let's look at this position. First, let's see from the black's perspective. Black to move. Uh, the correct move is going to be c4. Let's see why is that. Best way is to push the pawn and c. So in this scenario, white wins simply because of c4. The white side's main idea is block these two pawns. Okay, since in this particular pawn structure we have two pawns at the very back which can defend this square. So if it's 2 versus 2 pawns, right, if it's these two versus these two, then whoever pushes the pawn first will lose. So in that case, black cannot make progress on this end, and since white has majority on the opposite end of the board, white will be able to win. So how can white convert this into 2 versus 2 of between these four pawns? The idea is blockade these two. So if you push the pawn, white is going to stop and make it 2v versus 2v. This eases out how much you need to calculate in the end game by a lot, this concept. So keep it in mind for the next tournament. This basically wins. We don't need to calculate further. This is not going to make much progress, so this will bait these two versus these pawns. Of course you cannot push this pawn directly, but yeah, once king moves he will push, create a pass pawn, and then white will march this way, collect these two, and push pawns to win. All right, simple enough. Uh, if this is then if not d4, then what? Same way. So white's idea was to make it 2v2. Then black needs to make sure that it's going to be 3, these 3, or these 3, sorry, these 3 versus these 2, right? Best way to make sure of that is c4. Why is that? Now if white plays anything, the last pawn gets involved in the game, and now if white king tries to maneuver here, push these pawns and create a passed pawn, that will be too late because of b4. Now captures, and it becomes a 3 versus 2. And having a passed pawn on the opposite end of the board, white king will never be able to reach here in time and simultaneously defend these two pawns. So yeah, this will be winning for black, only if this is black to move, and we've already seen what happens if it's white to move. White is going to push c4 and make it 2v4. So this particular scenario helps us understand, in any pawn, if you have such type of broken pawn structure, what you need to look forward to. Even in previous, I think video 1 or 2, we looked into position where we had pawns on these particular squares, and how it would how we could have opposed the majority of 4 versus 3. All right, so that is all for today.